Hey, my arties. I hope this finds you well. I'm just going to take you through, believe it or not, our second last task until we break into the summertime. So this video is just going to take you through what you're going to be working on. So the first thing is, you're doing it right now, is to open and watch this video on the lesson of color theory. Now, I love color theory. It's probably one of my favorite units next to art history. But as you know, we can't do a lot of art history at the school. Hopefully, some of you have selected it for next year, and we can get messy with paint and enjoy it a little bit differently. However, in the meantime, here we go. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to open our lesson. You can either open it up as a PowerPoint slide deck or you can open it up as Google Slides. And for some of you, it's going to be a refresher. For those of you, maybe you haven't taken art before or you were away during color theory, this is a good refresher for you. I have included a handout for you to make notes. This is optional. I'll say it again, optional, optional, optional. You do not have to do it. You can if that's how you best learn. You're welcome to make notes, but you don't need to because you're not handing that portion in. I'm going to be checking for understanding to see what it is that you've taken away, what you've retained, and what you actually do know about color theory with our Kahoot. So I have set it up so that I can check your scores. Please put your actual real name. It's not time to make up fun fake names, although I'm generally entertained by those. Please just put your first and last name, and that way I am able to record a mark for that. If you have any difficulty with that, please just let me know. So there's our Kahoot link here. Right here is the handout that is optional. And here is our lesson right here. So let's take a look at our lesson on color theory. We'll just open that up. Hope everybody's having a good day. It's raining right now, and I'm hoping the sun's going to come out very soon. Okay, so introduction to color. Here's an overview of key terms. So as we're going through, right before we look at the lesson, have a look at the terms. Are some of them familiar? If you know for sure you know what the definition of color is, or you know what tints and vehicles are, then just skip over it. Here we are, our traditional color wheel that we have here with all the number of colors on our color wheel. Sometimes it's seen as a spectrum, but this is our traditional, sometimes referred to as a crystal color wheel with yellow at the top, purple or violet at the bottom. So we have three main properties of color that we look at as artists. We look at the hue, which is also just another term that we use interchangeably for color. We look at the value, and we also look at the intensity. So we break that down a little bit further with hue, intensity, and value. We've been looking a lot at value in both grade 10 and 11. Here we have the color spectrum. A lot of people are drawn to the color spectrum. It is something that we see as a band of colors that is created when the white light separates through a prism. It is also something beautiful that we all anticipate and hope to see after a rainstorm. And it is something very visually pleasing, that order that we're drawn to as humans. Here we are, just a little bit more information about the color wheel. So taking a look here, we have our hue, and this one is a little bit more extended. It also shows a tint, so that would be a hue or color plus white. Here we have a hue or color plus gray. So we do have, it looks tinted a little bit because white has been added to the black for the gray. And then we also have a shade, which is a color plus black. All right. Next one, we have a color triad. So if you imagine putting a triangle and using it as a dial in the very center of a color wheel, the point that we have of this, it should be equilateral triangle, though it looks like a little bit of an isosceles triangle. When you have three equal distance colors on a color wheel rather, that is your triad. So I have some examples there. A little bit more information about black, if we're adding it as a color, particularly with paint, when we add white and when we do gray. I'm hoping that I have some of you next year, because we usually do an intro activity that's really fun, and we look at tinting hues with icing and cookies, and we make our cookie color wheels, but we can't do that as a class. Here we go. Here's some visuals for tints, shades, and tones. This slide looks at different types of color schemes, and a lot of very junior or emerging artists, maybe unless you have it gifted and you are just drawn and you understand color theory and you can pick out a color scheme or a color swatch naturally, we do have to break it down and understand the intention behind what colors we put together and what kind of effect we can have by placing colors strategically, and how do we mix colors, or what colors look good together as a family of colors or in a color scheme. There are many different ways that we can group colors together. Some of the traditional ones include monochromatic, which is probably one of my favorites. Analogous is commonly used, so we have colors that are on opposite side of a color. Usually it's up to about 4 or 5 colors to have an analogous color scheme. Complementary is not often used traditionally in a lot of art. It's more a postmodern color theory or color swatch that is used because it has the highest level of contrast. When you have colors that you're using juxtaposed beside each other that are on opposite sides of the color wheel, it would be used in something more postmodern like pop art, for example, if you think of Andy Warhol or like a Roy Lichtenstein, something like that. Here we have another color scheme. So depending on what kind of mood you want to evoke from the viewer or what is pleasing to you with what you want to work with as an artist, you could have warm or you could have cool. This slide just takes a look at paint fundamentals. So oftentimes we take for granted the work that goes into where does the actual pigment get extracted from as artists. We just go and we get a bottle or a can of paint, but there's a lot more to it than that. There's the actual solid pigment itself, which comes from fine powders, and then it's mixed with different types of vehicles. And so oftentimes students wonder, or maybe they're too afraid to ask, well, what's the difference between these different types of paints? And often the main difference is the vehicle that it is mixed with. So in grade 9, you would use the pigments that have been put together and it's a water base. And the reason why we do that in grade 9, it's fairly unintimidating to use and it can come out of clothing easily. When you were in elementary school, you likely used what was called tempera paint, and you would have had pigment that was mixed with a vehicle that was predominantly egg-based. And that was because just in case there was a whoops in the class and someone ingested some paint, no problem, safety first, no one was harmed by that. Traditionally, what we would use in high school would be acrylic paints or latex paints. And the difference that I find between the two, with latex, if you think about latex paint that you would get from a hardware store in a can, is that it dries fairly quickly, but it's fairly thin in comparison to more of a gelatinous type texture that you would see in an acrylic jar or an acrylic tube. Now, some people really like it. I prefer latex over acrylic, but it's really a matter of preference there, and it's the type of vehicle. So that is more mixed with plastic. So we have our dye, our pigment, and it's mixed with a plastic. Both dry fairly quickly, the latex and the acrylic, and those are the two that we use interchangeably in the high school years. So latex tends to be a little bit cheaper. So if you know you're doing a larger painting, larger canvas, or you're doing a wall mural, most people will choose latex paint. A lot more, I notice, post or contemporary artists will choose to do latex paint. One example, I went and toured a studio on Western Avenue in Orillia where Charles Patcher has his studio, and he does a lot of contemporary artwork. And I was interested to see, because he let us into his studio, that he uses right out of a traditional paint can. He does not use acrylic. I mean, it saves a ton of money, and it also, I think it mixes a lot better. Some people, they really prefer that thick acrylic paint. You should, as an artist, experiment with both of them, see what you like, see what you prefer, but also be able to technically challenge yourself to be able to manipulate and use both. I find the color hue and the intensity of the color is a lot more concentrated in the acrylic paint. I could go on and on, as you know, on this slide, but I'm not going to. So I'm going to stop myself and we'll just keep going. So surfaces. So sometimes when you go to a paint store, they'll ask you what type of paint finish would you like? Or traditionally, when you went to get your photographs developed, particularly when you used to back in the day with film, but also when you're doing them digitally as well, it'll ask you, well, what type of finish would you like on it? So you can consider the type of finish with the paint type, but the other way that you can manipulate the type of finish that you have for your paintings is with a gloss mediums. And there's different types of gloss mediums that you can have. The benefit to that is it does provide that extra layer or that extra seal that's going to help preserve your painting for longer, so that it doesn't have to go back maybe over the years if it's something you keep for many decades to be refinished. And it does provide that nice seal and finished look. You do want to consider what type of gloss medium you want, though. So depending on the type of sheen you would like, if you want a high gloss, if you want it to be very shiny and reflect the light, then you would choose a high gloss. I tend to choose a very matte gloss simply because if people by accident put their fingers onto the paint canvas or onto the painting, then the oil from their finger is not going to show. And I also find that when you choose a matte finish, it doesn't show dust as much. So I tend to choose a more of a matte finish. So that's just something to think about when the actual surface dries. What type of finish would you like to have it? Different types of paint, so I've kind of already explained that, but there we have it visually and as well with the terms and kind of definitions. And that brings us to our assignment. So we have an alternate color wheel. Here we have an example here. Someone did one with crayons. If you feel like getting messy and you have some crayons, this is done with a piece of paper or canvas, crayons, a hairdresser. Really, that is it. I've also included on your assignment another example. You could do something creative with makeup. You could bake. You could draw and use pencil crayon. You could paint something if you want to. It really is open-ended. You could do a collage. I just want you to create and do something demonstrating your understanding of a color wheel. It doesn't have to be traditional. Here's some other examples here. And here we have our success criteria and our learning goal, as well as our rubric here. And just some other examples. You could do it with cupcakes. You could do it with sidewalk chalk if that's what you have. You have a lot of M&Ms or Skittles there. That's what somebody did one year. And that's what we would have done if we had more time in class. All right, so let's go back to our classroom. All right, so we have the video obviously that you're watching. We have our slide deck. You can use the handout. It's optional because you don't have to hand it in. Then you're going to do a Kahoot, and then you're going to create for me an alternate color wheel. So I've included my sweet little Annie. She is in kindergarten, and she made a color wheel out of toys. Be as simple as that, okay? That would be super awesome. That's all I have for you. The next time I post a video, it's going to be of your culminating task. Again, it's going to be very open-ended. And I'm really excited to see the creativity and see what you come up with. As always, if you have questions, if you're feeling frustrated, if you're not sure about something, if you just want to say hello, email me or we can arrange a phone chat. I hope this finds you well, as I mentioned before, and we will chat again soon. Okay, that's it. Bye.